Welcome, welcome. Today we are going to go through a classic Sicha of Likud Sichas, one of the well-known Sichas on Parshas Chaye Sara. It is from volume Tesvav 15 of Likud Sichas, the first Sicha of Parshas Chaye Sara. Okay, let us begin. We're not going to study in the words of the Sicha. We're going to talk about it, and we'll actually go through it paragraph by paragraph as the Rabbi lays it out in the Sicha. So this Sicha centers around a premise and a principle that is really the theme of so many Sichas and Likud Sichas, and that is the name of the Torah portion. The Rebbe approaches the name of a Torah portion not merely as being a coincidental choosing of the first meaningful words of the Torah portion. No, the fact that this parsha is called Chaye Sara tells us that that's what this parsha is about. This parsha is about the life of Sara. The title of the Torah portion expresses, highlights, and really describes what the parsha is all about. Therefore, the obvious question is, well, this parsha describes the events that chronologically take place after Sarah's passing. So therefore, why title it Chaye Sara? But not only is it a chronological question, it's more than that. Because the subject matters of this week's parsha they also seem to be almost antithetical to the life of Sarah. Let's go through them. What does this week's parsha talk about? Well, it talks about the burial of Sarah. Okay, that's the opposite of the life of Sarah. It also talks about Sarah's replacement. So we no longer are mourning for Sarah. Yitzhak is not mourning for his mother anymore because now he has a wife. He has a wife, Rivka, who replaces Sarah. That also seems to be antithetical to Sarah's life. Then even more than that, we have Avram remarrying Keturah and having more children. It's almost like he starts another family. And then finally, the end of the parsha tells us the genealogy and the descendants of Yishmael. Well, Yishmael is not even the child of Sarah. So therefore, firstly, the parsha seems to be chronologically after the life of Sarah, but more importantly, in content, it seems to really not be in sync with Chaye Sara. Okay, that is Ois Aleph, and I'll sort of announce where we are in the Sicha as we go along. So Ois Beis. So to be able to understand this, Rebbe presents a famous statement from the Gemara that Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Our patriarch Yaakov, he never died. And as the Gemara tells us, because his life continues on through his children, which means as follows. The definition of life is defined by life which is eternal, life which is true, is defined by one's connection to God. The Torah tells us, the true God is the living God. So life is defined by how connected you are to God. Okay, premise number one. Now, therefore, when someone is physically alive, it's not clear if they're really alive or not. In other words, since life is not a physical existence, it is something more than that. When you're physically alive, it's not clear. Are you alive or are you just happen to be taking up space right now? Only when someone passes away does it become clear that that person's life was a real life, that they were connected to God, because only then can we see, if that connection continues, then you know that they were alive during their physical life. If it doesn't, then they weren't. And therefore, the only way you can know that Sarah is alive, that she was truly alive, not just in the biological sense, is if her life continues after she's no longer physically alive. So therefore, very simply, let's see, what happens after she passes away? Well, guess what? Yitzchak looks for a wife. What type of wife does he look for? He looks for a wife who is like Sarah Imai, like Sarah, his mother. In other words, someone who personifies her traits, her values, her connectivity to Hashem. As we know, the miracles that took place in Sarah's tent, those miracles returned when Rivka came into Yitzchak's tent, because she really perpetuated and continued Sarah's life. So now we can see that Sarah is alive. This really is a Torah portion that tells us Sarah is alive. In last week's Torah portion, we didn't know she was alive. Now we know retroactively that she was alive. And that sort of is a beginning to the answer. But first of all, that doesn't cover the rest of the Torah portion. Fine. That covers the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. And second of all, if you look throughout this week's Torah portion, most of it is actually not about the marriage. We don't know very much about the marriage. We know all about what happens to get to the marriage. Eliezer, Abram sends Eliezer, the servant, he goes on a journey back and forth. We're not really talking very much about Rivka. If really this Torah portion was to tell us that Sarah's life continued through Rivka, if that was the purpose of the Torah portion, then talk about Rivka. Okay, so obviously there's got to be more to this. Before we get to the answer, let's get to more questions. Sif Gimel. Okay. We have the Avram needs to purchase a burial spot for his wife, so he purchases, of course, the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, the famous cave in the city of Hebron, and he has a whole back and forth with the people who own that cave, the people of Chase and a man by the name of Ephron. There's a back and forth, there's a negotiation. Why focus so much on the negotiation back and forth? And then let's actually look at the words that Avram uses to negotiate. He says, Ger v'soishav anochi imachem. Literally translated, I am a stranger and I am a resident with you. What does that mean? He tells them, hey, listen, you got to give it to me because I'm a stranger and I'm a resident. So this is the way Rashi translates it. Rashi says, well, he really gave them an ultimatum. He said like this, I am a stranger. Let me buy it. I'm not here. I'll just buy it like any stranger who wants to buy a piece of real estate. Fine. Now, if you guys are going to give me a hard time, then I have the next card. Here's the ultimatum. I'm pulling out another card here. I actually own the place. I'm actually a resident here because you see, God actually gave me this land. So either we can do this the nice way or we can do this the not nice way. That's the way Rashi translates the word ger v'soishav. I am a stranger, we'll do it nicely, or I'm a resident and I own this and I'm going to actually take it from you. That's what Rashi says. Two questions that Rebbe addressed. Number one, first of all, if he had the legal right to take it, if he really was a resident, if God really did give him this piece of land, then why did try to be a stranger first and buy it? If he owns it, he owns it. If it's his, it's his. And second of all, was it really his? Did he really own it? Is that true? God promised it to his descendants. Yes, but God didn't promise it to him. So how could he go and say, hey, if you guys don't give it to me as a stranger and let me buy it, then I'm actually going to take it because it's rightfully mine. It's not rightfully yours. You can't rightfully take it. Okay? Two questions about that story. And finally, before we get to the beer, before we get to what's going to tie this all together, the Rebbe, as he does, gives us many times in the Sichas questions from different angles, and then really gives us one answer that ties it all together so beautifully. At Avram's funeral, Avram passes away in the 6th Torah portion, we are told that Yitzchak comes to bury him and Yishmael comes to bury him. Yitzchak's name appears before Yishmael. He has two children. Yitzchak, though, the younger one, appears before Yishmael, the older one. And that teaches us that at that moment, at the funeral, Yishmael allowed Yitzchak to go first. Yishmael did teshuvah. He repented. He recognized that Yitzchak indeed was the rightful heir to the estate. Ask the Rebbe as follows. 1 minute. We are told just right before that Avram died b'seva tova. He died with how would you translate that correctly? I don't have an English translation in front of me. They translated well on in years. He aged beautifully, and we are told why. What is the meaning of he aged beautifully? Rashi actually tells us this right here. He says because he got to witness Yishmael repent, return during his lifetime. So the question then becomes, why is it that the Torah only really tells us about Yishmael's return at the funeral? He actually repented and returned earlier in life. So why not tell it to us earlier in the story? Okay, these are the questions. To recap, why is this the Torah portion titled The Life of Sara, when really everything about this Torah portion seems to indicate the opposite of that? Even talking about Rivka, the Torah really isn't focusing very much on Rivka, who is the embodiment of Sarah. It really focuses more on Eliezer and the whole back and forth of finding Rivka and bringing her. Secondly, this whole back and forth with Avram and in the purchase of the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, of the cave, why did he just try taking it if it was his? And how could he have taken it? It wasn't really his, it would only be his descendants. And lastly, as we just asked, why only mention Yishmael's return at the funeral? He actually returned early. Ois Dalet. Let us talk about what the fundamental difference is, both practically and spiritually, between Avram and Sarah. And the difference is as follows. Avram was the father of not just Yishmael, Yitzchak, he was the father of Yishmael. In fact, his name, Avraham, he's Avhamoin Goyim, he's the father to many nations. In fact, when God has to tell him to take Yitzchak to offer Yitzchak as an offering, he actually tells him, Bincha, Becharecha, my firstborn son. Well, which firstborn son do you mean? Because I have a firstborn son from Hagar and a firstborn son from Sarah. So therefore, really, and as a matter of fact, vis-a-vis Avram, Yishmael is his firstborn child. So Avram is the father of many. Sarah, just the mother of Yitzchak. Okay, that's practically. Now, what that reflects itself in their avodah and the way that they approach their service in this world. Avram reached out to everybody. Avram reached out even beyond his actual family. He even tells God, "Lo Yishmael yichel lefanecha." I'm happy with Yishmael. Yishmael alone could be my child. He could be my rightful heir. He reached out to everybody. Sarah, Once Yitzhak is born, Sarah dedicates her whole life to raising this child, to raising Yitzhak. It's all about Yitzhak. And the minute that there is an impediment, the minute that there is a distraction, the minute that something is going wrong with Yitzhak, for instance, Yishmael is disturbing, what happens? Yishmael gets sent out. Vis-a-vis Sarah, Sarah highlights and accentuates the fact that there is a big difference between the role that Yitzhak is going to play in the world and the role that everyone else is going to play in the world. That is the difference between the way Sarah and Avram approach their connection to Hashem and the way they are. Now that we have this, now let's go through every story in this week's Torah portion, and you'll see how every story really highlights Sarah. Let's start number one. The cave that Avram bought as the burial spot for Sarah. Who was buried in that cave beforehand? Adam and Chava. Adam and Eve were buried there. They are the parents of humanity, of everyone. Comes along this week's Torah portion. Avram says, yes, that cave has to now belong to the Jewish people, highlighting that, yes, there's an entire world out there, but you cannot compare the role that the Jewish people have to play and the role that the rest of humanity plays in this world. So what do we see? That's why it talks about the back and forth. The whole thing is Avram purchasing this land, taking it away from the world of Avham Moin Goyim, taking it away from the world of being everyone, this universal perspective, and an individual Jewish perspective, to this, putting it in the hands of the Jewish people. Now that's the difference between the world and the Jewish people. Now let's go further. What's the next story? The next story is about Eliezer. Eliezer is actually almost a member of the family. He's not, but he's almost a member of the family. He was doila umashke. He literally drank from the waters of Avram. He was part and parcel of the estate. He was a great guy. Lots of miracles happened to Eliezer. Yes. But what does this high Torah portion highlight? B'ni baruch ba'ata ara. Yes, my child cannot marry into your family. We know Eliezer had a daughter. Eliezer was very excited and would have wanted for that daughter to marry Yitzchak, but no. Again, what does this week's Torah portion highlight? Chaye, Sara. Yes, Eliezer, you're very close to the family, but you're not part of Sarah's mission statement. You're not part of Sarah. You're not part of this Jewish view. And therefore, you'll have to go outside your family. You'll have to go to our family. And this continues, Isvav. This continues within now. So again, the first story was to highlight, to accentuate the difference between the world, Adam and Chava, and the Jewish people. Next story, between even Eliezer, who's closer to the family, and the Yitzchak and the Jewish people. And now the final story in this week's parsha talks about the rest of Avram's family. Oisvav, we continue now. Avram has family, he has other children. What do we see in this week's Torah portion? The Torah tells us, Vayitain es Avram es kol asher Yitzchak. Avram gives everything to Yitzchak. He sends away the other children in the face of Yitzchak. In other words, even within the Avram's family alone, what do we highlight in this week's Torah portion? We highlight that Yitzchak is the rightful heir. Yitzchak, everyone else is sent away. They're given gifts, they're given presents, but everything is given to the true heir of Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak. Aha, this is Sarah's legacy. This is Sarah's life. And Yishmael is Ben Avram. But the Torah stresses, yes, he's born to Hagar. He's not Sarah's. He's not Sarah's. And now we'll understand, by the way, why his return is mentioned only at the funeral. Because, again, what was really Yishmael's mistake, if you will? What was Yishmael messing up? He was messing up in that he sort of saw himself, to some degree or other, as the rightful heir to the estate of Avram and Sarah. So what happens at burial? When Avram passes away, now comes the question, who's the heir? Aha, the Torah wants to tell us that at this moment, at this junction in their life, that's when Yishmael comes forward and says, you know what? Now that there's an heir, the rightful heir is Yitzhak. So therefore, the Torah talks about it at the burial. Now we'll understand why this Torah portion is Chaye Sara. Every story in this Torah portion does what? Shows us the difference between the world and Sarah's descendants. Between even the members of the household, Eliezer, and Sarah's descendants. Even Avram's very family, his children, and Sarah's descendants. Yes, it's all about Chaye Sara. So that really sort of answers the question, if you will. You could sort of end the Sicha here, but the Rebbe takes this up a notch. ups the ante, as you say, and gives us a little bit of a deeper perspective into what's going on. It's not just Oy Zion that there's a difference between the rest of creation and the Jewish people. Yes, there is a difference. It's more than that. We're told that the Torah begins with the word Bereshis because the Torah means to tell us Beis Rashis that this universe was created Bishvil Yisrael. It was created for the Jewish people to be able to fulfill their mission, their function in this world. In other words, everything else in this world, in this universe, is a means to an end. The end is the Jewish people being able to bring God into this world. Every part of this universe is there, has a function, has a mission. Its mission is to help the Jewish people fulfill the purpose of creation, bring Kedusha into this world. And therefore, if they do not fulfill that role, they really have no purpose to exist, because they are not an end in and of itself. Creation is not an end in and of itself. It is a means to an end, which, by the way, explains why it is we have 613 mitzvahs for the Jewish people, 7 mitzvahs for the rest of the world. It's not just a number game. It's not just, hey, we got more, they have less. No. The difference of these mitzvahs are not just quantitatively different. They're qualitatively different. There's a very big difference between. And that is that the other 7 mitzvahs, the 7 mitzvahs that all of humanity have, are there to be able to set this world up, to be able to make it a livable, functionable world, to inhabit the world, to make it, to create law and order, and to create the platform in which the Jewish people will then be able to fulfill the Torah and the mitzvahs. And this explains why it is that really the punishment for someone who violates one of the 7 Noahide laws given to all of humanity it's a death sentence, whether it's by the court or by divine death. That's a different story. But the purpose to tell you is that this is their function. Their function is to be a means to an end. The moment that they cease to be that means, the moment that they cease to function in that way, there's really no function, there's no purpose for their existence. So if creation doesn't act to help the Jewish people in their role of fulfilling Torah and mitzvahs, then there ceases to be no purpose for their existence. And therefore the penalty, it's not only a penalty, it's almost like the consequence, therefore, is death. And this really is highlighted. This is expressed in Chaye Sara. We're going to go through this now again. But Chaye Sara is where you see it. Chaye Sara again, Sara not just being the woman who shows us the difference between and highlights the Jewish role over the role of creation. No. More than that. It's that all of creation is there solely to serve, to help, to enable, to facilitate the Jewish people's role. You see this beautifully in the back and forth with Avram. Listen to it this way. God created the world, created the land of Israel, and he gave it to non-Jews. He gave it to other nations to hold on to. Again, it's not that they are there. They're there to hold on to it because the time has not yet come fit for the Jewish people to inhabit, to inherit, and to own this land. They're there to make it safekeeping, grow the land, inherit it, make it a beautiful land so that when the time comes, it can be a beautiful land to give over to the Jewish people. Now, every part of Israel has its time when it's supposed to become the property of Israel, the property of the Jewish people. And guess what? This cave, you know when it was supposed to come into Jewish hands? It was supposed to come into Jewish hands at this moment, for when Avram was coming to bury Sara. So here's Avram's conversation. His conversation is very simple. Guys, it's not my time. You guys are holding on to it. I'm the stranger here. God gave it to you to hold on to it. Allow me to buy it, and it'll be great. But if you don't, then you will retroactively show that you are not the true owners of this land, because remember, the purpose of you having this land is to be able to sell it to me. If you deny the very purpose for which you were given this land, then automatically I become the owner of it. In other words, I don't own the land. My children are going to own this land one day. That's true. But should you, the children of Chaye, should you, the Ephraim, should you not fulfill the purpose for which you were given it, then automatically it becomes mine. You cease to exist. The very purpose for which you got it no longer is null and naught, and therefore it becomes mine. That's what he meant. That was the ultimatum. So our questions were, why didn't he try taking it first? The answer is because he couldn't take it first. The second question was, how could he have taken it? It didn't belong to him. That's true. It didn't belong to him. And therefore he went about by buying it. But had they not sold it to him, then it would have belonged to him. It would have become his, you understand? And therefore the ultimatum is indeed, and this again expresses this all. And how did this come about? As a result of Sarah's passing. Sarah's passing is what brought this about. to be able to highlight that their entire purpose for holding on to this land was to be able to facilitate its ability to become property of the Jewish people. So that's Sarah's doing. That's the true life of Sarah. And this Test explains the whole Torah portion. It tells us, for instance, most of the Torah portion this week, Chaye Sara, talks about what happened to Eliezer and his journeys going back and forth. All that happened, and the miracles, and going back and forth in the conversation. What's the function? What's the purpose of that? For Yitzchak and for Rivka. That's the entire purpose of it. And the moment that someone tries to stop it. So we know that Rivka's father, Besuel was supposed to, again, be a very good guy who was supposed to father Rivka, supposed to help facilitate her marriage. The minute he decides to disturb that, he wants to negate, he wants to stop that marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. He's an impediment. He's gone. You're denying the very purpose for which you exist. And that, therefore, is the reason that the entire Torah portion is telling us that all this happens for Yitzchak and for Rivka. That is, everything is a means to an end. And this Yisud explains Yishmael as well. Bishmael, not only is Yishmael the Ben Ha'ama, not only is he, yes, he's different, he's the child of the maidservant, Yitzchak is the child of Sarah. It's not just the fact that they're different. His very life, everything about him was dependent on him recognizing his place in Avram's family. In fact, at the end of Parshas Chaye Sara, we have the statement, Al Pnei Kol Echav Nafal, which means that literally that means Yishmael fell down. Yishmael fell down. Rashi tells us, so long as Avram was alive, Yishmael lived. After Avram passed away, the word it uses for living is nafal. Nafal literally means to fall down. But the Torah, nafal can mean to dwell, as Rashi tells us it can mean to dwell. But the Torah decides not to use the word dwell. It doesn't use the word yishka. It uses the word fall. You know why? Because it wants to tell us that what type of living did Yishmael have after Avram passed away? He had a living that was a falling type of living. In other words, his existence fell down. That's the literal translation of the same. The Rebbe takes this homiletically, takes it out of its literal translation and tells us as follows. Yes, once Avram passed away, he fell, which means so long as Yishmael remained loyal to Avram who said, Lu Yishmael Yechil Afanecha, Avram who said, this child Yishmael, I want him to live. And that life would therefore be a life of facilitating and helping Yitzchak, then he lives, he dwells. That's wonderful. But the minute that Avram dies, not only in the physical sense, but Avram dies from within Yitzchak. The minute that, from within Yishmael, the minute that Yishmael no longer remains loyal to his connectivity to Avram, his life as Avram, then Nafal, he falls. Again, highlighting the same point. Yishmael is wonderful. He's there to help and to facilitate and to be there. But the moment that his existence is no longer loyal to his mission statement, he ceases to exist. Again, this is all Oisir Aleph, the legacy and the life of Sarah. This is Oisir Aleph. Avram's name is Avraham, the father of many. So the fact that creation is a medium and a means for the Jewish people is not accentuated in the name of Avram, only in the name Sarah. Sarah, which means Sara, which means the governship of the Jewish people, and that the rest of creation is just a means, a medium, and an accessory to be able to allow the Jewish people to fulfill at the purpose for which all of creation is there. That's accentuated by Sarah. And that's what this entire Torah portion is all about. That's why it's Chaye Sara. Now you think we finished the Sicha right here, right? No. After all is said and done, bottom line, this is after her physical life, right? No. Because her whole life was what was there. She lived to express this truth. And that truth only became a reality upon her passing. In other words, it's not just that we are just continuing. Until now we said, yes, we're continuing, we're perpetuating Sarah's life. Look how all these things are perpetuating her life. Fine, you're perpetuating her life, but that's not her life. Now the answer is no, this is her life, because during her lifetime, it didn't take place. Didn't her life, you didn't see it, it wasn't expressed, it wasn't revealed. Rabbi gives an example, for instance, after one is rewarded in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, you get the reward. What is that reward? That reward really, in truth, is the revelation of everything you've accomplished in your lifetime. Now you actually see it, because on this world you don't see it. So during Sarah's life, you didn't see all this. This was what Sarah's life is all about. She worked, and then when she passed away, Now we see Sarah's life. This is what Sarah's life is about. And again, I'm not going to repeat, but this is really highlighted in every single part and parcel of the Torah portion. Now, finally, Oisigim. What's the lesson? And here, interestingly, takes an interesting twist. And that is, today, there are people, they call themselves Yishmaelites, descendants of Yishmael, and they say that the Maras HaMachpelah, the Hebron, that this cave belongs to them. After all, they too are the descendants of Abraham. Abraham bought it. They too are the descendants of Abraham. So firstly, number one is, the Arabs today are not the descendants of Abraham. There's a famous Ibn Ezra that the Rebbe quotes in the Sicha that tells us that they are called Yishmaelites. They're called Yishmaelites because they sort of accepted the religion of Islam upon them, but that doesn't make them the biological descendants of Yishmael. That's first of all. So first of all, they don't really have a biological claim to it, a genealogical claim to it. Number two, Abraham bought this for who? He bought it for Sarah. He bought it for Sarah. In other words, he bought it to be able to take it away from the rest of the world and to be able to give it to Sarah, to Yitzchak, to not be Yitzchak, to part of Yitzchak, not all of Yitzchak, because Yitzchak has two children, Yaakov and Esav, only to Yaakov's family. This is bought for the Jewish people. And therefore, when Ishmael, when the Arab world becomes wild, they become disrupted, well, remind him that he is the child of Sarah, the maidservant. He has a unique purpose to play in this world, but that's to facilitate the role of Yitzchak. And therefore, first of all, the Jewish people have to understand this, because if Jews don't understand it, we're not going to be able to explain it to the rest of the world. But once we actually feel this way, once we actually internalize this message, then we'll be able to explain it as appropriate, but not just as appropriate, but it has to be said with strength and with confidence to explain to the rest of the world, because the fact is the rest of the world believes in the written Torah. They believe in what they call the Bible. They believe in this. Therefore, just tell them, explain it to them. And therefore, we ought not capitulate to the nations of the world, the quote-unquote descendants of Yishmael. And when we do this, and they will stop pressuring the Jews, they're going to realize that it's actually in their best interest. It is in their best interest for this cave, for this Maras HaMachpelah, to be in Jewish hands. This then is the Sicha, a very well-known, beautiful, and famous Sicha, obviously studying it in the words, but I believe that we covered paragraph by paragraph the Sicha. God bless you all. Thank you, and Hatzlacha Rabbi.